We'll call the Management Council meeting into order. Ashley? Okay. Ms. Phillips, if you would please call the roll.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Senator Crago? Senator Guru?
Here.
Senator Nethercott? Senator Salazar? Representative Baer?
Here.
Representative Haroldson?
Here.
Representative Heiner? Representative Yin?
Here.
Vice Chairman Beitman?
Here.
Chairman Nyman?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Turn that microphone on. That would help. Director Olbrich.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. One item of business we're going to get out of the way first before the recalibration committee bill is the appointment of management council to a member of the subcommittee on exhibits and wayfinding for the Capitol. And Wendy Madsen will explain why you have to make that appointment and who's already been appointed to that subcommittee.
Thank you, Director. Ms. Madsen, welcome to Management Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Exhibit and Wayfinding Subcommittee was created through the CapCon bill in 2021, and it is comprised of 3 members of the State Building Commission and 3 members of the legislature. And there's been continuity in that membership the last couple of bienniums, and they are currently, as you've probably seen, about halfway through the Exhibit and Wayfinding project. They were also tasked through legislation with the acoustics work that's needed in the Capitol, as well as some different build-outs in the extension, a broadcast studio, and the art gallery space. So that work is ongoing, under contract, and recently President Beitman has appointed Senator Landon to continue in that role, and Speaker Nyman has appointed Representative Nicholas to continue in that role. The 3rd member was Representative Sherwood, and the question is whether or not Management Council would like to reappoint Representative Sherwood to that role. One appointment is by the House Speaker, one appointment is by the Senate President, and one appointment for the legislative membership is by the Management Council itself. So that is the question before you. Typically, we don't do these types of committees until after the session is done, but their work is ongoing constantly.
Thank you, Ms. Madsen. So with that in mind, is there any discussion, committee? Senator Group.
Yeah, at this time, I'd like to make a motion that we appoint Representative Sherwood to continue her work on the wayfinding and,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Guru, it's the Subcommittee on Capitol Square Exhibit and Wayfinding.
what she said.
What she said. Do I have a second? Representative Baer, seconded. Moved by Senator Guru. Is there any discussion? Question being called. All those in favor of the nomination of Representative Sherwood as the Management Council member directed to the Wayfinding Committee, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Thank you, Senator Guru. Representative Heiner, Floor Leader Heiner, excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question. This has been going on for 4 years, and we heard that they're about halfway through. Is there a sunset anticipated, or is this something that's going to continue on in perpetuity?
Ms. Madsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Heiner, the exhibit and wayfinding work itself is scheduled to wrap up in 2025. There's the civics lab that will be coming in down in the Capitol Extension, along with a number of digital exhibits. But then as the legislature has tasked that subcommittee with more work, the work is ongoing. So the acoustics project right now is under design. It includes acoustical remedies for the chambers, Joint Appropriations Committee, meeting rooms 110, 113, some executive branch spaces. And so depending on the timing of that design work, the hope is that the work itself will start this interim. And then it will likely depend on how invasive that work is, how much could be done in the coming interim. And then anytime we have session, we obviously have to have to stop work where needed and start up again. So I can't give a certain timeline on acoustics. The other work that's ongoing in design right now with the build out of the broadcast studio outside of the media center, that is hoped to also begin this interim. For those of you who were on council last year, you may also recall that you tasked this subcommittee with serving a joint governance role. That was basically the subcommittee comprised of the 3 members of SBC, and the legislature has really proven itself to do effective collaborative work together between the branches. And so council has requested that structure be in place to address some items that are under Wyoming Statute 9-5-106F, which have to deal with joint visitor services and event planning and exhibits and artwork and some of those types of things. So the subcommittee itself does not have a sunset date, but it may just depend on what you may all choose to send their way.
Any follow-up? Any other questions for Ms. Mattson? All right, thank you, Ms. Mattson. Appreciate your time. Next item, Director Obrecht.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I think we're on to the bill draft to create the recalibration committee, and to walk management council through that bill will be Tanya Heitrick and Matt Wilmarth.
Ms. Heitrick, Ms. Wilmarth, welcome to Management Council. Look forward to your testimony. Who would like to go first? Ms. Heitrick.
Mr. Chairman, members of Management Council, Tanya Heitrick, Operations Administrator with the Legislative Service Office. You should have received in your email 25 LSO 674 School Finance Model Recalibration -2. That was prepared at the direction of Chairman Nyman, and I'll just go ahead and walk through that bill. It's a relatively short bill. I would note that the contents of the bill are largely drafted based on prior select committee composition, as well as sort of an inflationary figure for the amounts contained in the consulting provision and for the amounts to pay the committee. So section 1 begins on page 1, line 10. And subsection A, page 1, line 12 through page 2, line 7, establishes the Select Committee on School Finance Recalibration. This committee would consist of 12 members to be appointed by the president and the speaker, 6 appointed from each house, with one from each house from the minority political party. Subsection B, page 2, lines 9 through 12. This requires the speaker and the president to appoint the chairs of the committee, and provides the LSO will staff the committee. Subsection C, page 2, line 14 through page 3, line 2, commands the select committee undertake the recalibration of the education resource block grant model, and authorizes the committee to work with professional consultant experts. Subsection D, page 3, lines 4 through 7, requires the select committee to report its recommendations back to the legislature along with any legislation. It also provides that this committee may introduce legislation as well. Subsection E, lines 9 through 14, requires that the appointments be made no later than March 31st, 2025, and that those individuals would serve until February 9th of 2026. And any vacancies would be appointed by the president and the speaker. Subsection F, lines 16 through 21, requires various state agencies, including the Department of Education, the Data Advisory Committee, to collect and provide any information necessary for us to undertake recalibration of the block grant model. And then section 2 on page 4 contains the appropriations. Subsection A on lines 3 through 16 appropriates $800,000 to the LSO to undertake a contract with the necessary consultant. And subsection B contains the appropriation for the expenses of the committee. You'll note that that's $120,000 on page 4, line 18 through page 5, line 9. I would note with the appropriation for the expenses of the committee, this committee historically has met more frequently than your other standing committees. In the past, it's ranged from 5 two-day meetings or 6 two-day meetings, so 10 legislative days or 12 legislative days. Moving on to section 3, this provides that the bill is effective immediately on lines 11 through 14. I would also note, and I talked to both the speaker and the president about this, that the composition of this committee has varied throughout various years. Sometimes it requires that the Joint Education Committee chairman serve on the committee. In other instances, the Joint Appropriations Committee chairmen have served. A lot of times, leadership also serves on this committee. So subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Heitrich. Any questions for Ms. Heitrich?
Mr.
Majority
Chairman,
Leader Nethercott.
just a question just for the public and for any members who would be interested in serving. What does typically the time commitment for a legislator to serve on the committee look like? I understand it's about 3 weeks. Is that correct?
Ms. Heitrich.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, we discussed with both the president and the speaker sort of a legislative school finance school, if you will. And Matt and I anticipated that that would be approximately 3 8-hour days to just lay the foundational work. What is the school finance model? Historically, what does recalibration consist of? What do these studies look like? Matt can kind of walk you through some of the elements of the model. What are the mandates from the Campbell cases for the various elements? And then in addition to that, it would be those days that I mentioned, the 10 meeting days or the 12 meeting days. And it requires a fairly substantial investment by a committee member outside of the meeting days as well.
Further questions, follow-up? Any other members, follow-up? Majority Leader Heiner.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Heitrich, on page 4 at the bottom on section B, it talks about the $120,000 appropriation. And just for clarification purposes, it says the purpose of this is to provide salary, including salary for the chairman and mileage. Do the members get wages while they're serving? Is there anything special for the chairman? I just want clarification there, if possible, Ms. Hightower.
Ms. Heitrich.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, the chairman receive additional compensation for chairing the meeting. Mr. Director Obrecht, do you have anything to add?
No, it's just, Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, it's just so these select committee chairmen receive the same extra salary, and it's not very much. I think it's $4 per day that a joint interim committee chairman would receive.
Thank you for clearing that up, Majority Leader. Any other questions? Any other questions for our guests? Seeing none? Okay, well, I guess I would entertain a motion to move the bill.
Chairman, you might want to take public
Oh,
testimony first.
I thought we had to do that after we started it, discussion, okay.
No, maybe
Public
take
testimony then.
testimony.
By all means. Oh, we have an amendment, okay. That will have to be dealt with. Good evening, Ms. Delancey and Superintendent Degenfelder.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Megan Degenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. With me is Cindy Delancey, who has spent considerable time as an attorney studying the Campbell cases as well as recalibration. In discussion of recalibration this year, I think that the committee has an important decision to make. Whether or not we continue down the same path of costing out the same basket that we do time and time again, or whether we take the approach of a two-step process and have a comprehensive look at the basket of goods as well as recalibrating it. The Wyoming Constitution is really the genesis for the basket of goods and provides that the legislature create and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public schools adequate to the proper instruction of all youth in our state. And so it's important when we talk about costing out what that is, to take that step and do a comprehensive analysis of what that basket of goods is, to take the time as a body of the legislatures to re-examine what the basket of goods is. In 2018, some of you will recall, it was when I was working for then Superintendent Jillian Balow, we pushed for computer science within the basket of goods. That was the first change that had been made in over 20 years. We have not had a full, truly comprehensive re-examination of our basket of goods. There was a minor one that was discussed, had a few of those small changes. But we bring to you today possible amendment to the bill to include, again, that two-step process for the recalibration committee to do. I will hand it off to Ms. Delancey to speak more, but would just close with, we ask that our students and our teachers be innovative in what we do, and I believe that is incumbent on us as policymakers as well. So with that, I'll pass it on to Ms. Delancey.
Ms. Delancey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Cindy Delancey. I am an attorney in Wyoming with a local law firm. I'm here tonight just as a concerned citizen, a parent of 2 children that have gone through, been blessed to go through the Wyoming education system, and one of my children being a child with special needs. I've spent considerable time. I'm super interested in this topic. I really appreciate the work that this committee and others have done. This has been a real source of conversation for many years in Wyoming. And I think that we're living at a time where we've seen with the recent election that parents and school choice and education is at the top of a lot of voters' minds. Looking at how we educate our children in Wyoming is really the question before us today. We spend a lot of time looking at all types of issues in this building. And we're as parents and citizens, of course, we always we're doing that work for the future and the next generation. So we've come to a time where we're at a crossroads where we just continue to do the same old thing that we've known, and it's kind of like that comfortable sweater that we've worn and feels good and we know what we're doing. Or do we really step back, include other voices in this process, open it up for a full inclusion of stakeholders, of parents, of educators, of private sector, of people that are all concerned about the future of our children and how they're educated. So what I've brought for you tonight is just for your consideration, is maybe just really further refining the good work that we've done in the state of Wyoming for many years, and really taking the court's guidance as far as that this is really the responsibility of the legislature. Now, you'll see some places where maybe there's some dollar amounts as placeholders, just for lack of not really having a full understanding of the cost of what we could be doing here. But just kind of walk you through where we are on this. I started with some findings as far as really laying out and telling the story as far as kind of how we got to where we are today, because of, we have federal law, state law, we have multiple court decisions that have helped us understand and interpret the Constitution on this very topic as far as, defining education in Wyoming. So just really kind of walking you through on Section 1 are these findings. It's not traditionally the historical practice of the legislature to include findings in legislation. However, I do think that knowing that there is such a interest in this topic, that we likely will see the courts weighing in on this again in the future. And by outlining these findings, Mr. Chairman, really helps whoever those judges are at that time kind of, really step back into the minds, of this body and really understand some of the things that this legislation is intended to kind of do. And so as I've, explained, to you about these findings, is it really just kind of puts forth a timeline, if you will, of some of the key phrases and concepts that our Wyoming Supreme Court has articulated. To the comments of Superintendent Dagenfelder, you know, it is time. As a parent, as a citizen, I think people are ready that we have a full examination of our basket. We've heard hours of testimony in the Education Committee about how full the basket is. And maybe as we, you know, there's been changes made at the federal basket, and we have not made kind of fallen suit as far as a healthy discussion about what's appropriate for the times and what's the best way that we can deliver with technology, efficiency, homeschooling, virtual learning. You know, especially after COVID, Mr. Chairman, the world has changed exponentially. And it feels at this moment, as we look for the next 5 years, as we recalibrate, that it's appropriate to take this two-step process to, one, define what education is, what it should be by this body, the legislature, which is where the duty and responsibility pursuant to the court cases tell us. And then once that definition occurs, figuring out the costing of that definition. Now, let me be clear, you can't have the cost influence the decision of the definition of what you want. So walking through to section 2, my version is a little bit more lean and efficient than perhaps a very large committee, but where, Mr. Chairman, I think that additional expertise might come is again in sub C, where ex officios may be appointed by the mutual agreement of the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House, brings expertise to the work of the Select Committee and provides statewide perspective. As I've listened to these conversations before, Mr. Chairman, there is a lot of people involved that have a high degree of expertise in the education community, and having a broader swath of participation from our state citizens. We have a lot of really talented people, including homeschool parents and, you know, just the business community that as this body defines what the definition of what education should be, as you legislate that definition, bringing in that talent and expertise from Wyoming citizens, the goal being is that hopefully to land us in the right place that's fit for purpose in 2025. So my version, or the proposed version of this draft, has 3 members appointed by the Senate, 3 members appointed by the House. I've modeled really a lot off of House Bill 40 from several years ago, that we have inclusion of the minority party, again, bringing in these ex officio members to be subject matter experts to spur conversation, perhaps in different ways as the committee undertakes that learning. That's to the benefit. Again, outlining specifically a 2-phase process as contemplated, as opposed to just relying on the goodwill of the members of this body in the future to identify this 2-phase process, as opposed to skipping step 1 and going right to step 2, just clearly defining that, putting the committee to work pretty quickly, that appointments shall be made no later than March 15th, and that the Select Committee shall remain in existence until the end of the year. And then that any vacancies would be appointed by the President and the Speaker as appropriate. That the committee shall assemble and get to work no later than April 1st. This is a priority for us, and by having ambitious timelines such as that makes it to be of paramount priority that the process kick off quickly, and that we're not mired down in waiting for appointments and confirmations and elections, so that this just clears the road to go to work. This is another provision also that was in that other H is a carryover from that bill, kind of helping with some of the data and giving people the ability to release certain data points in the process. There's $100,000. Again, there was $120,000 for travel and members to cover the cost of salary. Just putting that in there as well. Do I know if that number's right or wrong? I don't know, but oftentimes we hear sometimes in this body that topics can't be thoroughly examined due to budget constraints, and just feel that this is of paramount importance to make sure that resources are available should the committee choose to have a lot of people involved in this discussion, to have that statewide representation, and to make sure that there's adequate resource available as they do their work. Mr. Chairman, moving on to the next page, again, I suggest maybe breaking this process out to cost the first part, again, without worrying about the second part. Do I think $750,000 is correct? I don't know. I put that in there, not knowing what consultants who have the expertise to do this charge. That's just kind of more of a placeholder, but really trying to reemphasize the point of delineation between phase 1 and phase 2. Again, what I mean by that is phase 1 is the self-reflection and definition of truly what do we want in our basket of goods? What should that basket look like in 2025? We hear a lot that people don't like the basket as it is now. We hear it from parents, students, educators, administrators. You know, the whole gamut always kind of is weighing in on the basket. And for me, that's kind of an indication that the time's probably right to take a look at it. This conversation was started before COVID, and then other things came up that got us a little bit thinking about other things during that time period. But I just, really ask this body to give due consideration to this two-step approach to fully vet and analyze and study and listen and learn and identify the course of education as we continue forward in our educational journey. The other piece of this, Mr. Chairman, that I think is extremely critical is as we move down to Section 3. Wyoming Statute 2113-309T is where we find that guidance as far as the recalibration process. That language is very short, and by taking the opportunity for the body to amend in, what that language should be, and basically codifying this two-step process for future legislators that embark on recalibration, in the future, to kind of have that clarity of this two-step process, that it's so important that we stop and make sure that we have an education that's appropriate for the times, and that, that it is fit for purpose in 2025. That way there'd be no question as far as, what could happen. And then also outlining just the process as far as phase 1, phase 2, and to do the work of the committee. And then moving on, just giving that flexibility to maintain that it remains cost-based in light of changing conditions within our state, as well as the nation, and any relevant modifications to law. Giving that road of travel to be able to come up with a process that's fit for the times, that isn't stagnant, that legislators in 30 years from now don't find themselves saying, we haven't looked at this in 60 years. This is really a pathway, Mr. Chairman, that we could start going down this journey for our future students in the state of Wyoming, and I'm hopeful that you will accept a different guidepost on how we do this, with hope to get a different outcome than what we've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delancey. Superintendent Degenfelder, would you like to add something to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That about covers it. I think we would stand for any questions at this point.
Thank you, Superintendent. Committee, questions? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Superintendent, so the recalibration process has generally taken 12 legislative days, as you heard. How much more time do you think that this will take on top of it to deal with the basket of goods?
Superintendent Degenfelder.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, it will most definitely take more time than the traditional recalibration process. I'm not sure that it would be double the amount of time, but I think probably a couple more weeks on top of that would be necessary. And recognizing that this is an additional cost that would be incurred during this, not only for the committee to meet, but also that analysis. But I think that the long-term impacts of this outweigh that cost.
Majority Leader Nethercott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, do you anticipate having two separate experts in this two-part piece? And if so, do you have any sense of who could actually provide a response to the RFP in a timely fashion and then be able to produce those results so we can get this accomplished within our timeframes?
Superintendent Degenfeld.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, that is something we've been discussing. I think that the preference would be to have two separate vendors for the different work, and ideally to go out for RFP, which we've spoken about as well. There are limited vendors in the country that can do this work, particularly when we look at the Part 2, as we're referring it to, which could very well end up being who we've used in the past. But I think that those are two separate bodies of work, and so we've been reaching out to some folks on the national level about that as we speak, and so we're working on numbers and exactly who would be available for that.
Follow up?
Please.
Yeah, recognizing that there are limited vendors, and so I don't think that we're signaling to any potential vendor of any kind of preference. I think there's only less than a handful of potential vendors nationwide. Who have you identified that may be interested, knowing it's all of May, be interested in responding to the RFP concerning the basket of goods?
Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, we have not spoken to any individuals at this point in time.
Further questions from the committee? Senator, oh, excuse me, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lansing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nethercott, just like to build on that. Really, the way the language reads as far as step one, Senator Nethercott, it wouldn't necessarily need to be some national vendor to help us have a conversation to reflect about the definition of education. My preference, if I was queen for a day, my preference would be that it would be a Wyoming person. There's a lot of very skilled people that have a background as far as the basket, the case law, could help facilitate conversations amongst the public in Wyoming. That truly, I think that it would be nice to have, perhaps someone that's done this type of exercise before, but I'm confident that we have the skill and the talent within our own state to facilitate, a very robust conversation, to do the analysis that is needed at this point in time if for some reason we were not able to have some out-of-state vendor be able to respond in an ambitious time frame.
Thank you, Mr. Lansing. Follow up? Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, thank you both for this. But I do want to ask, and it kind of flies a little bit in the face of what you just said, so don't take it too badly. But I was just, 50 states in the union, and there's some good models and there's some models that aren't so good. There's some rural, there's some urban. Of course, we don't need them as much of the urban, doesn't have as much interface here. But I guess my question would be, are we trying to reinvent a wheel when maybe there's another state that's doing it well, is well regarded in their scores? And I guess this is directed to you, to the secretary here, as far as, or superintendent, I'm sorry, to the superintendent. But, did you talk, when you were preparing this, did you talk about looking it around and saying, hey, boy, this state's really, XYZ states, rural like us or this, and boy, they're really doing it right. And maybe let's take a look at what they're doing. Who did they hire? What did they do? Did they bring the skill set? And I appreciate the fact that you're talking about new ideas, because I think the state's asking for that. It's something we all talk about. So whether it's homeschooling, charter schools, whatever, but someone say, boy, those guys have really got a handle on this. We ought to be talking to their vendors. How did that discussion, or did it come into this, and how? And it kind of moved away, maybe. We'll talk.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think that that's part of this process, and I think necessary. I think there are examples of that. I mean, the NAEP, the updated NAEP scores will be made publicly available later this week, to be able to identify, certain states that are standing out in different ways. And so we were just speaking earlier today about that very thing. We do, historically, we outcompete most other states in the country. That's a great thing. The not so great thing is the bar's pretty low and that we're pretty stagnant. If you look the last couple of years at how we've been doing on our state assessment, how we've been doing on NAEP, pretty stagnant. And so that's where, this concept of we're doing well, but can we do a lot better? I think we can. And I think that's what we need to look at here. How do we stop being stagnant and start rising up and really increasing proficiency for our students? So to answer your question, though, I think that that's absolutely part of this process that we're talking about.
And then follow up,
Follow
Mr.
up,
Chairman?
absolutely.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
And then, and boy, this is going to get me in a lot of trouble with a lot of folks, but who cares? As far as the makeup, I understand about lean and mean, and I understand about, bringing in other voices. But boy, this is such an important subject and so critical that I wonder, talk to me about, we're gonna put this in the hands of folks that aren't elected, sitting beside people that are elected. And I understand getting information in, but when it comes down to the final decision, it's the people that are sitting, they're going to be standing for our reelect, and then going to be standing on the work of people who weren't. And just talk to me about that, how that, like I say, that concerns me. And like I say, judging by your number, get partisan for just a second. When I look at your 3 and 3 and 1 each being the minority party, I say, boy, that sounds pretty good to some. I'm gonna think it's gonna sound very good to others, but it's gonna sound pretty good over here. But what we're all interested in is getting the best product. That part I know. So I'm trying to figure how a smaller number of electeds, who are all gonna be on the line, all 90, whatever, 3 of us are that are held for this and above, how that works for you, how you feel that settles out.
Superintendent?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, and I'll speak for myself and let Cindy do as well. I'm not wedded to the particular number. We hadn't seen the LSO draft before, we were putting this together over the weekend. Cindy was working hard at that. And so I think, as long as we can be efficient with this process, move forward, I think the thought, at least for me, is that if there's an additional person or two on the committee, that they'd be ex officio members in that process that have really studied this exclusively, so that those votes would absolutely fall on the elected members. But the number, that is under your purview, I think, to decide. We were just, filling this in over the weekend. But Cindy, please.
Ms. Delancey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Grew, excellent points. And again, everything in here is pretty much a placeholder just to kind of spur discussion, but with the goal being to have a very inclusive process. Because I can tell, just speaking for myself as a parent that's been shut out of my children's education process, people don't want that anymore. They want to be involved. They're willing to spend the time. They want to have an opportunity to be, reflective of the very diverse geographical makeup of our state. What works in Lusk doesn't necessarily work in Cheyenne, which doesn't necessarily work in Casper. So to be able to have, a roadway for people who want to be involved, to be part of the process, to be invested in the process, with the hope of having our elected officials make the best definition that they can of the process. So again, just placeholders for discussion purposes.
Okay, follow up? Yes. Majority Leader Nethercott?
I'm intrigued by the two-step process. I don't know that it's feasible from the time frame that we're under, particularly with the amount of, let me just back up, I attended an education committee meeting this morning. There's a lot of stakeholder involvement. Everyone wants to be involved in education, and everyone has an experience with it and an opinion about it. And there's a lot of experts in the room. A lot. Too many, I think, actually, is my take on it. And so I have great hesitation about this robust and productive conversation about everyone's opinion about what should be in the basket of goods. Do I think stakeholder involvement is critical? I do. Will these be public meetings? They will be. This is not a new conversation for Wyoming, nor is the basket of goods. So all of these specialists that we have and interested stakeholders, where is their communications on what they believe should be in the basket of goods? Has this been communicated to the legislature? Does the superintendent have a position paper on those items in order to lead the discussion on what should be in the basket of goods, rather than what my fear is that the tail will start wagging the dog in short order.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think that's absolutely fair. This is kind of wide open. What exactly is that process? Where is the starting point? Do you just open it wide and we're talking about everything? And so there have been some pieces that we've talked about. Virtual education comes to mind. That's one that has changed drastically in 20, 30 years since our original basket. And so I think having some of those goals of which individual items I think we're going to tackle and look at first might be a good first step in that. And so happy to have that conversation with this group of how we define that, because I think that you're right. And we just, I mean, we have not contemplated that at this point in here. This is as far as we got over the weekend, but I think that that's fair.
Ms. Delancey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Nethercott, for that question. This certainly is not designed to encourage a free-for-all. And I think that's truly where I come back to my past comment about having someone with a Wyoming mindset who's a strong leader who can facilitate these discussions and perhaps have some spur materials put together by the department or other sources to try to lead that discussion in a healthy and productive manner, with the eye towards the future. You know, that word reimagining, like now is our chance to like reimagine this whole thing, figure out what's right. When you look at the federal ESSA well-rounded education definition of things like technology, computer science, career and technical education, those are engineering. Those are things that kind of defines that well-rounded education at the federal level. And it just feels that our basket is very outdated and antiquated. So to have that conversation with invested people with an eye towards the future is really the goal, to do it in a productive and constructive as opposed to disorganized and chaotic approach.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add another comment as well. Another potential starting place as well is the good work that's been done of the profile of a graduate through the State Board of Education of determining, based on feedback from the public, reconciling the profile of a graduate with the basket of goods. But I think there's various directions that we can go.
Follow-up, Senator? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've kind of been searching and looking for a little bit of history, and I'm just making sure I'm clear. So obviously, Campbell 2, is that where we got, just explain the beginning of our basket of good conversation. Are we on the original, are we on 1.0 still? Or have we done a reevaluation of the basket of goods through that process? Just, can you bring me up to speed on this conversation, please?
Whichever one would like to take that. Superintendent?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'll start here. So of course, the basket was a creation from the Campbell cases that we saw, and that provision of an adequate and equitable education for all. There have, of course, been recalibrations over time that have costed that out. There was a study in 2017 that looked at the basket, but very little changes were made from that. One of which I mentioned was computer science. That was really, the first change in 20 years since its inception. And I believe maybe one or two other, small changes in that arena. Do you want to provide any more additional comments?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Representative Haraldson. With the hope, I'm really excited about this topic as a lawyer. This is just like awesome stuff. So with the hope of not keeping us here all night, I'll definitely keep my comments short, Mr. Chairman. But basically, just a quick timeline, Representative Haraldson, is basically in 1980 is really when we saw the Washakie case. That's the first case on education funding that kind of talked to us about education funding based on local wealth is unconstitutional. So that's kind of, there was a little bit of discussion before with, in my home country of Carbon County. Actually, my mentor and boss, John McPherson, litigated the Sweetwater case in 1971. But 1980 is kind of when the court started saying, like, okay, we need to get this. Education funding must be equal regardless of location. Funding should be based on cost to fund an equal education, not an equal amount of funding per student. So then we roll into the legislature, takes the guidance from the court. And so between the period of up to 1995, there were some legislative changes, funding formulas based on classroom units, which are based on average daily attendance, which again, this whole language as a business person is all brand new to me. So I've had to learn all this stuff along the way. But basically the legislature was responding to the cases, doing what they thought was, pursuant to the guidance of the court. Then we come in 1995, that's when the Campbell decision first, Campbell 1 is what it's known as, The legislature's education funding decisions are subject to strict scrutiny, which, again, we could turn this into a whole constitutional law session, which isn't my intention. But really, by setting some of the standards that the court was going to follow, it was unconstitutional to allow wealthy districts to retain local funds that are not available to poor districts. Like, there was this whole kind of discussion in the court, and as far as how we educate our students in Wyoming, that kind of grounds ourselves in this, that everyone has to have, you know, this equal education in Wyoming. Then the legislature amends education funding system following the Campbell one in the 1995 to 2000 era, started hiring outside consultants to assist in education data collection and providing, you know, advice to the legislature. There were some funding thresholds created, formulas for personnel costs. The formula did not include an automatic adjustment due to inflation at that time. And capital construction, you know, how we build our schools, that became a part of the conversation as well. So then we find ourselves in early 2001, where we're back in court again. And this is the Campbell 2 case. And this is where, again, cost disparities for any reason other than cost are unconstitutional, is what the court tells us. And that the court also reiterates that taking interpretation from the Constitution as far as that an education system must be appropriate for the times, meaning more than a minimal level of education, and that the court opines as far as, you know, what that education should look like. In these cases, you really had the court really giving solid to-do list to the legislature at that time, saying that the legislature must re-examine the components of its funding model every 5 years. The legislature must adjust funding amounts for inflation every 2 years. You know, this is where what we have recalibration as we know today, that was the genesis of that. Funding formulas that contain arbitrary cutoffs or funding amounts are deemed unconstitutional, and that the legislature cannot reduce educational offerings because, you know, just because they want to. All students must be offered essentially equal education facilities over time, is where that language came from. So then after that all went on and the legislature worked on that for a while, the state moved for rehearing on the Campbell 2 decision. And that's where in late 2001, we ended up with Campbell 3. Campbell 3 clarified some of the rulings from Campbell 2. The majority opinion of the court defended the court's authority to order the legislature to ask, you know, really kind of the question of what is education. So then we come back between the 2001 to 2008 era, and the legislature continued to make further changes to the funding model following Campbell 2 and Campbell 3, what we learned from the court during that time. The legislature at that time period drafted new recalibration formula, and it was not based on the prior one, because the court basically was saying that you can do whatever you know, like you can come up with your formula so long as it's supported and not arbitrary. The legislature created a formula to determine maximum square foot on facilities, districts, and capped utility reimbursements based on maximum square footage. So you had some nuances going down to what the formula should look like. So that brings us to Campbell 4, where basically in Campbell 4, the court really like backed off and was like, you know, the legislature is the body responsible for determining what will be included in the educational offerings. Again, defining that basket of goods, and that the districts cannot compel the legislature to fund programs not enacted by the legislature. The courts do not choose the proper level of education funding. Although the Supreme Court will ensure, the court's role is to ensure that education funding is constitutional, but will not tell this legislature what to do on that. The court will not require the legislature to use the same recalibration formula as before. It's the legislator's role to determine what formula to use. So that's really, Representative Harrelson, like how, you know, how we've got to where we are today is really, you know, an evolution of the body of law through trial and error on all parties. You know, I'd like to think all parties have been acting in good faith in this. There's no reason to suspect otherwise. But, you know, when someone has needed some guidance on are we doing the right thing, the court is where that guidance comes from. So the last time the court has weighed in on this is 2008. And again, that's where we just feel that maybe there's an opportunity to seize this moment in light of what we've learned through the pandemic, in light of what we've learned with other styles of learning, in light of what we've learned about parental involvement and choice, and really trying to figure out an education style that is in their students' best interest, that we have an opportunity in Wyoming to really figure out what that definition of education should be in 2025.
Follow up? Any other members?
Mr. Chairman, just one closing remark, if I might.
Superintendent, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that, based on that history that Ms. Delancey gave, there's a lot of conversation with policymakers around education funding. We want to talk about education funding. Unless we define what the education is, we cannot then change the funding. And so that's a crux of this as well, because constitutionally, that whatever the education model, that basket that the legislature has created, you must pay for. That's what we've heard loud and clear from the courts. And so thus the need for, if this body wants to talk about education funding, what our education model is, the two-part process is truly integral.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any further questions from the body? None? Thank you very much. Appreciate your input. We'll take testimony from legislators. Senator Scott, please. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I used to help you do that when we were on education together, but.
Mr. Chairman, I want to raise a couple of issues that I've seen in the, over my experience in the past 4 years where I was chairing the Senate Education Committee. Want to raise two in particular. Easy one first. We've had a problem with not being able to get recalibration legislation passed. We've missed, I believe, 2 times, and problem has been lack of ability to get agreement between the House and the Senate. The solution is quite easy on that one. I think we need to make sure in the final recalibration bill there's a sunset date that would force us to pass something so that we do the hard work of coming to a compromise. Second problem is more difficult and one that I think is quite relevant to the bill that you're considering. The legislature as a whole and its members have lost control of our education funding, and particularly control over the total size of it. There have been a number of factors that have been gradually ratcheting things up. One is the number of automatic adjustments that there are within the system. Various things that just happen whether we change the law or not. One of them is the student population. That one I don't think we can do anything about. But there's a number of other things. We need to pay very careful attention in the recalibration to those. And the second is the system where to change the total funding, we either have to change the basket of services or we have to go into the individual components of the model and change that. And none of the legislators, none of us, know really how to do that. We do see cases where members hear that something ought to be added and they come in and make an addition, but it's to a block grant, and what we're really doing is just growing the block grant. What I suggest is that we should tell the consultants that the funding formula they develop is going to be used to allocate the funding that's available among the several districts, and that there should be a definite date that formula is based on. Some date in the past where you can get good data and say, this is what the thing cost at that point. 1st of January, 2025, possibly. You can get good data that's available then, maybe an earlier date if you can't get the good data. And then you determine the total funding based on a percentage of that, what that formula shows. So we can say, okay, there's been inflation since the as of date, appropriate date for the appropriate figure is 102%, 103% of the formula, something like that. I suppose if there was deflation, it could go down, but I'm not looking for deflation at any time in the future. We're going to be around for. But I think if you do that, tell the consultants to give you an as-of date and that the formula is going to be used for distribution among the districts, which it would be. And, you know, be the role of the courts then to see if the formula was fair, if somebody thought it wasn't. But the total funding ought to be with to the legislature, and that's, so you add everything up and say that's the total, and then what percentage of what the formula shows should we be funding? Then we will regain control as a legislature of the total funding and keep it from just exploding out of control in a way we cannot afford. I think individual legislators, we can do a good job of seeing whether our districts are well enough funded. Are there indications that the district is spending money on a lot of things that it shouldn't be? We'd hear about that in our community. Are there indications the districts can't afford to get the fundamentals done? We'd hear about that. But the details of the formula are just beyond all of us. So that's something I would urge, and that should reflect the RFP that we use to acquire the consultants. I would say on the basket of goods question, you've got two non-financial issues that probably predominate over the financial issues there. One is simply budgeting the students' time. There's so much time that's available for student instruction. If you keep adding things to the basket of goods without taking anything out, you exceed what's available for the students' time, and then you don't do a good job on anything. The second is you have to have an understanding of what fundamentals you need to build a body of knowledge in the student that can then be used for the other items in the basket. So you have to see what builds on what. It's very obvious in the math, but it's also obvious in some of the other subjects that you've got to have a certain amount of fundamentals, or you just can't add something new to the basket because the students don't know enough. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the 2 points I would make to you. How you're going to do the RFP and who's going to write it, I'm not sure, but I think that will have an influence in how we come out. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Any questions for Senator Scott? Majority Leader Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for being here and for your vast experience and knowledge on this subject. Just to be clear, my understanding is we haven't done recalibration for a number of years, and basket of goods hasn't been reevaluated for a while. But in order to be truly efficient and defensible after we go through all this effort, do you believe that we need to do the two components as recommended by the previous testimonies and do a reevaluation of the basket of goods and then a recalibration of the formula, that they need to be both together, or just do simply the recalibration of the formula only?
Senator Scott.
My advice would be to do the recalibration of the formula, the financial side. I think if we change the basket, update that, the non-financial considerations predominate, and we can adapt the finances to it later. But that's my judgment. I think if you try to have one committee do all those functions, the basket is sufficiently complicated. You put a burden on it where most of us legislators could not participate.
Any other questions for Senator Scott? Committee? Thank you, Senator Scott. We appreciate your input. Thank you for being here. Other discussion, input from the audience? Anyone? Ms. Ellis.
Hi.
Senator Ellis. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking to see if any other legislators wanted to speak. My name is Affy Ellis, and today I'm representing K-12 Stride. They're the online curriculum provider for Wyoming Virtual Academy. And in visiting with K-12, this is a group I've been familiar with for a lot of years. We thought this would be an opportune time if the committee decides to go with the draft that's been presented by the Legislative Service Office to just take a look at what online funding, how that works, and maybe look at how other states do it. Right now, the Wyoming Virtual Academy operates as a program through the Niobrara School District. They've been doing that for a while. They've been in Wyoming for about 20 years. But for those of you who have done recalibration, looked at the model, see how we fund various components of it, for a long time, it's the square peg round hole situation. Online students, for example, their transportation needs are just different. They don't bus kids to a brick and mortar school every day, but they do have different needs when it comes to shipping educational materials and things like that. So rather than continuing to have these students who are there about 650, between 600 and 700 students any given year, maybe we could just look at, as we're studying finance systems, to see how other states do it with virtual ed and to decide to go from there. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the quick ask from the Wyoming Virtual Academy. I did want to offer, though, that I visited with the superintendent before this meeting. We didn't have a chance to compare notes. I think if you were to go with the proposed amendments she offered, we've had an agreement that that would be something that they would look at as well during this interim of recalibration. So I just wanted to put this on record that we would support that if you decided to go a different direction with your bill draft that you have before you. Along those lines, I have, as you can imagine, 1,000 thoughts about education. Happy to answer any questions about my particular request or anything else in general.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Ellis? Majority Leader.
Thank you. How do Wyoming students pay tuition, or how is the Wyoming Virtual Academy funded?
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nethercutt, it is a public school, so it's funded, they are funded as a public school in Wyoming, but they're treated as a program through the Niobrara School District. So all the money is funneled through that particular district, and then they have agreements and different things. And so, in the spirit of equity, I think that's an ongoing concern, is how those dollars flow to kids. I think anyone who's worked on education knows the vast majority of your expenses on salary and benefits. And so this exercise would just kind of highlight, and it would be a deep dive into how many students there are, how many teachers, what is that funding flowing looking like. Aside from the funding piece, over the years, we've had concerns just about accountability. Before I got in the legislature, there was a lot less transparency about, if you have a high-performing student, can districts count those grades toward their district and then leave Wyoming Virtual Academy students with maybe lower-performing students on their academic record? I mean, there was just a lot of games being played about accountability. WIVA tends to attract kids that are on their own learning path so they can learn at their own speed. So you get some real high-achieving kids with really great test scores. But it's also an option of last resort for kids that are struggling. So sometimes you have a kid who's on a dropout path. They get enrolled in WIVA, they eventually drop out, and so sometimes they have higher dropout rates. So it's a unique thing, but it's the effort that we're trying to get to is just more accountability so they can answer questions when legislators ask, like, what are you seeing? How is your school performing? Are you meeting the needs of your students? I'd say that when WIVA first entered Wyoming, there was a ton of concern about how it would just ruin Wyoming public education. It hasn't. It's always been about 600 to 700 students. There's one other provider that operates out of another school district, so in total, this affects about 1,000 kids.
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't want to go on a rabbit trail here, but just curiosity. The majority of the age of those students that attend online, are they elementary, high school?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Ellis?
Senator Nethercutt, I don't have that breakout, but it's a K through 12. And not just a few years ago, they actually had their first class of kids that had started as virtual students, as kindergartners, and then graduated as seniors. So it's a K through 12 program.
Any further follow-up? Any other members? Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Thank you for your input. Yes, Ms. Herman. Welcome to Management Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Management Council. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm just here on my own behalf. And I guess the first thing I want to do is recall, since I have been around for the ages, is that when this legislature first wrestled with a formula, that they were going to have a funding formula, and how would we do it, the legislature hired a group called Management Analysis and Planning. The acronym was MAP. And I want to credit, I don't know if Senator Scott is still here, but he, I give it a lot of credit to him for figuring out that they were not going to be an answer for us, and he sort of called them out. It was a classic Senator Scott moment, and I give credit to him for getting us back on track, and MAP is simply a little page out of the history book today, but I also want to credit the LSO for the work they have done and all the consultants they have hired over the years. I have 3 children who graduated from, who went K-12 at Laramie 1, graduated, had got a great education, and so I just want to give credit where it's due on that. Two things I just want to mention. Number one, as we all know, a lawsuit is making its way through Laramie County, well, State District Court here in Cheyenne, and a decision could come daily. I think it's being written as we speak, so I have a question, and it's on the topic, is the funding formula adequate or not? It was the trial took 2 or 3 weeks and testimony. So I guess the question is, if that decision comes down while the recalibration goes on, which is probably likely, how will you incorporate that into your recalibration efforts? Will you put it aside? I'm just curious how that's going to be handled. And the second thing I want to mention is that a request that you add the state authorized charter schools to this recalibration effort, where the testimony that I've heard in Senate Education the past couple of weeks is that the schools are not funded adequately. They have, because of the nature of how they're kind of standalone without being part of a school district, they end up having a lot of administrative duties that are not in the funding formula as is. And so instead of using an inappropriate model that's made for another design, I guess I would just request that they be included and their unique structure, place, funding, so that we'll have a number, because it sounds like right now we really don't know how to fund those. The testimony committee was there, not being funded adequately, however, and I think we understand the need to fully fund schools. If you're going to approve them and create them, we need to fully fund them. So those are just the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Committee, any questions for Ms. Herman? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Herman. Appreciate your testimony. Others? Any others like to speak to the issue? Going once? Going twice? Closed public comment. Committee?
Move the bill.
Bill has been moved by Majority Leader Senator Nethercott, seconded by Pro Tem Haroldson. Discussion.
I would move the amendment. Mr. Chairman, I would move the amendment as provided by the online schools, which would be on page 2, line 19, after the word directives. Insert, the select committee shall study virtual education funding models in other states and offer suggestions on a funding formula for Wyoming virtual schools that is both equitable and predictable.
Seconded by Leader Heiner. Discussion. Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to amend the recommendation or the amendment by K-12 Stride into the designated location. I didn't write it down, so I trust somebody did.
Page 2, line 19.
Page 2, line 19. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
And Mr.
Passes.
Chairman,
Yes.
I have a second motion, which
Please.
is immediately after that particular amendment, that we add in that same section, the select committee shall study charter school funding models and offer suggestions on a funding formula for Wyoming charter schools that is both equitable and predictable.
Motion, second by President Beitman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Amendment's passed. Further amendments, discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
guess I'd like to ask our LSO staff to come forward potentially and maybe walk us through their thoughts on this two-step process of starting with the basket of goods as proposed by the superintendent, where we heard from our most senior legislator on this topic to actually start with the finance piece. So we heard two different thoughts about this proposal. Just curious about two things, the substantive approach there and what benefits can be achieved, and then secondarily, the logistical approach and any challenges you see with that.
Ms. Heitrich, Mr. Wilmarth? Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, Matthew Wilmarth, LSO Senior School Finance Analyst. As Superintendent Degenfelder indicated, the legislature did actually do a comprehensive review of the educational basket of goods in the 2017 recalibration effort. I will send that to the Management Council after the conclusion of today's meeting. It looked at the contiguous states to Wyoming, plus North Dakota, plus high-performing states across the nation, including New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Indiana, Virginia. I might be missing one. But it reviewed not only what we call the educational program, English language arts, mathematics, science, but it also compared the scholarship programs across various states as well, because Wyoming has not just our Common Core of Knowledge and Skills, but we have the Hathaway Success Curriculum. So it also contrasted other state scholarship programs to Wyoming's Hathaway Scholarship Program. That was the first comprehensive review of the state's educational program since the 1997 enactment of our educational program. So it hasn't been that long since the legislature has done that work. And as Superintendent Degenfelder indicated, it did result in some modifications and updates to that section of law. So I'm happy to send that to the committee and happy to address any questions related to that background before we proceed.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I can,
Majority Leader.
theoretically, just throwing an idea out, recognizing that work was done in 17, why couldn't we adopt those findings to give to the consultant to do the cost assessment?
Mr. Wilmarth?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, nothing would prohibit doing that. And in fact, in the 2020 recalibration, our consultants reviewed the most recent reports as part of their work. And so our current consultants, Pike Hassan Associates, did review that work. They didn't have any suggestions as part of the 2020 recalibration to update the educational program, but it's certainly at the forefront of their work when they have reviewed the prior studies and made their recommendations to the legislature.
Chairman, yeah, follow up. And this is just I'm just going to put a pen over here. What I would be curious to know from the superintendent and from Ms. Delancey is what would be different as the identified basket of goods from the 2017 work and then 2020 to do a compare and contrast to maybe expedite this without all of the stakeholder involvement, which is always helpful to hear from, but maybe not efficient as we need to be with where we are in time. And then if I
Certainly
can,
have them come back up and address that. Go ahead.
then logistically, with that piece, how does the proposal as provided by Ms. Delancey and the superintendent work with our procedural timeline requirements?
Certainly, I can respond to that.
Ms. Heitrich, please.
Senator, it would be difficult to do two efforts at the same time, not impossible, but it would be difficult from a timing perspective. Recalibration in and of itself is a very intensive effort. It's a lot of work on behalf of your staff as well as the consultants that you hire. And depending on what the redefining of the basket effort looks like, that could take on a life similar to the school finance recalibration, which, two things. One, we are going to send a memo that we penned in 2021 outlining the prior recalibrations that has links to all of the prior studies for members of Management Council to look at. And also from a procurement standpoint, we are required to not only draft the RFP, but have the RFP on the street for 30 days. And I know a number of you have probably sat on various committees over the last interim that have undertaken the RFP process and scored those. That is also not an insignificant event. So certainly possible. If you tell us to do it, we will make it happen. But don't want to undersell the commitment both by your staff as well as the membership.
Thank you, Ms. Heitrich. Follow-up? Good. Anyone else? Questions for, yes, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we look at this, I think one of the questions I think that's probably burning in all of our minds is as we look back over the last 20, 30 years of this educational model moving forward, one of the things that I think is natural just with human nature is that we continue to build. Well, this is a good idea, and that's a good idea, and this is a good idea, and that's a good idea. And all of a sudden, just like even in our area, all of a sudden we've got kids that are struggling to get their classes done because we got a whole bunch of different sporting events that they have to be at in 4 different days in 1 week or 3 different days in 1 week. And I'm just asking the question, where's the point where I know it's a big lift and I know there's a lot to it, but we almost have to ask the question, are we asking these kids to do something that is almost beyond maybe what the scope was ever intended to look like? And so, yeah, we had a 17 report, but we're 25, 30 years into this, asking the question, is this the direction that is best for the kids? And we could do a reevaluation, but are we actually gonna hit the marks that we're looking at hitting? And so as we talk about that basket of goods, and we talk about sending out a 17 report, is that going to actually give us a clear definition of the number of hours in a student's day to compare to the basket of goods and how we're accomplishing it? And have we outsourced our time? Do you think that's something that we're going to get out of that 17 report, or do we need to dig deeper to really get a good answer there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think it's important to point out what the basket of goods is in statute, and that's contained in 21.9.101. And so it's the common core of knowledge. It's reading, language arts, social studies, mathematics, science, fine arts and performing arts, physical education, health and safety, humanities, career and technical education, world cultures and languages, government and civics, including state and federal constitutions pursuant to 21.9.102. And then for grades 1 through 8, yes, Matt, and computer science. For grades 1 through 8, reading, writing, and mathematics are emphasized, and specifically the common core of skills is problem solving, interpersonal communications, computational thinking, computer applications, creative thinking, creativity, life skills, including personal financial management skills. So it's things like that. And I think when you look at the basket of goods, which of those items are members willing to put on the table and the costing? And to your point about sort of the learning fatigue, the Education Committee has heard a lot about that through their stakeholder meetings and their interim meetings. And as a direct result of that, the State Board of Education has decreased their performance standards by 50%. So each one of these items the State Board takes and puts together content performance standards and benchmarks. As a result, hearing the legislative committee, they have reduced that by 50%. I can't tell you that this study is going to tell you in this amount of hours during the day, a student in this grade is going to learn X. I don't know that that's sort of the effort that the state superintendent is describing. I got the sense it was more, does the delivery and the basket of goods, as I just identified it, match today's skill set necessary for students? And one thing I would note is, you also have high school graduation standards as well. And they mentioned the profile of the graduate. I think the state board is also working on the graduation standards, but that also needs to be identified.
Follow up? Thank you, Ms. Heitrick. President Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions. Number one, how much does the Common Core state standards drive the basket of goods? And, since states don't have to adopt those, how much does that cost us by adopting those if it does drive the cost? That's question number one. Question number two is regarding ex officio members. Is that constitutional, number one, for us to have non-legislators as ex officio members on a committee, a select committee? By definition, ex officio, you can vote. So we'd have to deal with that. So your thoughts on those two issues? I know that's a lot to handle right there, but I'll start with that. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. President.
Yes, Ms. Heitrick.
I should clarify that I was discussing the Common Core of knowledge and skills, and then separate and apart from that are the content and performance standards enacted by the state board. And that is the effort that they saw a 50% reduction in those to more clearly identify what it is important at every grade level when students move from one grade to the next. What do they actually need to know? What should they be focusing on? As far as your question about ex officio members serving on the select committee, historically that has not been done, but I would certainly defer to Director Obrecht.
Director, would you be willing to take that?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming Supreme Court has given the responsibility to you to develop a fair and equitable system of education in the state. And you're certainly free to develop that based on whatever input you want. But I would caution against including non-legislative members in any sort of official capacity on a recalibration committee. I just think you open up an unnecessary door there to possibly questioning what is developed from that committee. People are free to provide whatever input they can or want to through any meeting, through public comment, without being on the committee.
Follow up, President Beitman? Okay, very good. Any other members with questions, comments? Further discussion? Thank you. Did you want to have Superintendent Degenfelder come back up and clarify some of your questions, Majority Leader? As far as the necessity of the two-part? A little more, okay. Very good. Any other public comment? No other public comment? Prerogative of the committee. Everything good?
Question on the bill.
Question's been called. All those in favor of the bill as amended?
Mr. Chairman, maybe we'll take a roll call vote on this one.
Okay, we'll take a roll call. Ms. Phillips? Yes, Mr. Grew. I mean, Senator Grew, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll answer anything this time of night.
We're only late for supper.
Okay, I want to make, before we vote on this, I'm a new guy here, so. And you probably realize why I was thrown off this committee a few years ago, but I'll do it anyway. So what we're doing tonight is we're getting asked to decide probably the most consequential decision of this legislature. We get it with, I'm sorry, scant information, at least maybe I missed something, but anyway. And now we're supposed to vote on it, and we're going to vote on something that's going to have this long-lasting ramification all the way down the line. We're not doing it with any input from the Education Committee, except for the chairman, or the former chairman. And we're asked to do this on a draft bill that was just set in front of us 2 hours ago. Am I missing something?
No, I think you're getting pretty good, yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Maybe we can provide a little bit more background for you there, Senator. This bill, in substantially this form, was discussed at length at the November Management Council meeting,
Kyle, that makes sense.
okay? And there was public testimony taken at that meeting. Now, what that committee decided to do was not act on that draft and allow this council to act. And that was the prerogative of the 67th Management Council to give the 68th Management Council the responsibility on what to introduce. Hopefully, I guess, for more buy-in. And so just wanted to let you know that this isn't an issue that hasn't been circulating for a while now.
That's the ask for discussion. And Representative Craigle, or excuse me, Senator Craigle.
I also answered anything at this time of night. I guess just a question maybe for the director, and this goes back to just the question of the basket of goods. And I would hope we could, if we decide to go that direction on the floor later on, we could amend that into the bill draft for forwarding. But I just, because I've never been part of this discussion before, I have a sneaking suspicion that whatever we do as a legislature is likely to get challenged. And so does that, whether we include that or not in our particular recalibration study, is that going to have an effect on what the courts do or do not? And I know you can't answer that yes or no, but just in your experience, you've been here a long time. What do you think about that?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, as far as I'm aware, and Tanya can answer this more thoroughly than I can and authoritatively, but there's no requirement for you to look at the basket of goods in any set time frame like there is to recalibrate the model. So if you wanted to do almost a parallel track where you looked at the basket of goods and you recalibrated, and if you adopted a new basket of goods in the 2026 session, what may happen then is another recalibration following that as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Majority Leader.
Yeah, I think there's only two members here on this council that were here last year. And perhaps paying attention to this issue over the years, despite not wanting to. We have to do recalibration. We can no longer delay recalibration. It has to get done. So this really isn't that optional, as uncomfortable as it may appear. Any, I think, effort to try to come up with a new system is not timely now. We have to move forward with the system we have, and we can talk about reinventing Wyoming public education, but not tonight. And so you're being asked to do what we have neglected to do for years, which is recalibrate. And so we've got to move down this track. We just must. I know it feels uncomfortable, but I assure you, we can spend some time looking at the previous memos and opinions that are both available online and from staff, that this is the right direction. And there's still time to work this bill and have further discussion and amend it. But for now, tonight, I think we're good to move forward.
Thank you, Senator Grew.
And thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I wasn't trying to belittle anything that anyone's done previously. I'm not. I'm just asking about what I'm asked to do tonight. And I've heard a lot of compelling testimony, and I think that the addition and the suggestion about STRIDE, the STRIDE group being put in here, I think is good. I'd like to see more of this involvement, and I think as we work the bill through, we can do that. I'd like to see the Education Committee have a big part in this and those types of things. And I know as we work through the bill, so I appreciate you telling me that we vote on this and then we work it through in the normal process, and I look forward to doing that.
I think I heard the senator volunteer for recalibration committee.
No.
I'm ready to go to roll call vote.
Well, let's go to a roll call vote then, I guess.
Actually, any other discussion? I truly do not want to go past anybody's desire for questions to be answered before we move any further ahead. Representative Yen.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just as one of the two members for Management Council, Director Obrecht's recollection is correct, and I actually, which is good because I totally forgot what we did in November. It feels so long ago right now. I do think that reevaluating the basket of goods is something that we could do and should do. I think we can task joint education to do that in a parallel track. I think a parallel track is probably the best way to go about that. I think asking for a commitment for someone to do 2 phases during the next 2 years is a lot. We could do it. I'm sure we could do it, but I think that this is probably the better way to go at this time.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Representative Yin.
on
Majority
this,
Leader.
on this topic of the basket of goods, I've heard the superintendent is interested, wants this first part process, all the stakeholder feedback. Superintendent is free to do that and facilitate those meetings throughout the state, and then provide that information back to the committee. I mean, I am deeply interested in understanding what that would reveal, and we would consider that with great interest. I don't want to dismiss that effort, but for now, we got to get this recalibration train on the track.
Thank you, Leader. Any other discussion? And just for my part in this, I would have to agree and echo the concerns and also the desires of the rest of the committee. I do believe that the 2 pieces of this are critical to really doing a fundamentally good job of actually doing recalibration. And I do appreciate your bringing that. How that would look and how that would shape and fold into here, that is still would be determined by the committee. But I guess to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I'm always glad to be corrected because I am married, the thing I would like to maybe understand in this is we're basically designing a committee that will be able to take this testimony. That is the fundamental decision of the meeting here tonight. We are creating a committee that will be able to go back and take this other information in and process it, and to be able to pull in any information that we can possibly can, do the best possible job that we can for the people in education in the state of Wyoming. So I think we're on the right track. I think we just need to make sure that everybody's satisfied with this type of committee, the numbers on this committee, so that both houses are fairly represented. I think it's important that we are not doing any kind of cram down or anything like that. I like the fact that we're equal numbers on both sides, and that we can move forward in a way that is going to do a good job and get the information we need. So I look forward to that information and would welcome it. And so I guess all those in favor, roll call. That's right, we got to call this roll call. Just trying to get you out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Ashley, please.
Mr. Chairman, you are voting to sponsor 25 LSO 674 School Finance Model Recalibration 2 as amended. Senator Crago?
Aye.
Senator Guru?
Aye.
Senator Nethercott? Senator Salazar? Representative Bear?
Aye.
Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Heiner? Representative Yin?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Beitman? Chairman Nyman?
Aye.
That is 10 ayes.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that. Is there any other business that can be duly brought before this committee at this time? Seeing none, we will stand adjourned. Thank you all.